Picture this. You're alone in your house, and every creak, every shadow feels like it's hiding something sinister. These aren't just any stories. They're the kind that cling to your thoughts long after the lights go out. Tonight, we explore a hidden darkness, one that thrives in the corners of our minds. Let's step into a world of psychological terror, where every moment feels like the calm before something truly terrifying happens. Ready to journey into the unknown? For the last 10 years, I've worked in the film industry. The behind-the-scenes experiences I've had have made me question much of what I once believed about Hollywood. Most people see it as a world of glitz and glamour, a place where dreams come true. But that's only the surface. Beneath all the shimmering lights and red carpets is a place filled with shadows, secrets, and whispers that only a few ever encounter. My fascination with Hollywood began when I was just a child, largely thanks to my grandfather. He was a major figure in the industry during the golden age of cinema. He worked alongside some of the most famous stars of the 1960s. Audrey Hepburn, John Wayne, Alfred Hitchcock, names that have become legends. Whenever we gathered as a family, Grandpa would tell stories about the Hollywood elite, painting a picture of a world filled with larger-than-life personalities, grand parties, and unforgettable moments. But while my siblings and I sat on the edge of our seats, hanging on to his every word, there was one person who always seemed distant during these storytelling sessions: my grandmother. Unlike the rest of us, she never smiled or laughed when my grandfather shared his tales. Instead, she would sit quietly, her face growing tense, her eyes shifting as if she was somewhere far away, lost in memories she would rather forget. For years, we didn't question it. But as I got older, it became clear that something about those Hollywood days had deeply affected her. While my grandfather basked in the nostalgia of his experiences, Grandma's silence spoke volumes. It wasn't just that she had heard the stories too many times. There was something darker at play, something we couldn't quite put our fingers on. After Grandpa passed away, curiosity got the best of us. We needed to know what had really happened during those years. Why did Grandma always seem so uncomfortable whenever Hollywood was brought up? Had something happened that she had kept hidden all this time? It wasn't easy to get her to open up. At first, she deflected our questions, insisting that it was nothing. But eventually, she sat us down and revealed a side of her life that we had never known. This wasn't about glamorous stars or exciting movie sets. What she told us was something far more disturbing, something that had haunted her for decades. If this story has already caught your attention, make sure to hit that like button and share it with your friends. You won't want to miss the rest of this chilling tale. In her 20s, my grandmother had been full of dreams and ambition. Like many young women at the time, she wanted to be a star. Despite being married to a well-known producer, she was determined to make it on her own. She refused to use my grandfather's name or connections and auditioned under her maiden name. She was confident that her talent would get her noticed. One day, she received an invitation to audition for a mysterious film. It wasn't connected to any of the major studios, and even my grandfather didn't know anything about the director or the project. He warned her to be cautious, but my grandmother, ever determined, brushed off his concerns. She thought this might be her big break, a chance to prove herself in an industry that rarely offered second chances. The address for the audition was in a part of town she had never visited before, far from the usual studio lots. The building was old and decaying, its windows broken, and graffiti covered the walls. Despite the unsettling atmosphere, she convinced herself that this was just part of the process. Every actor has to start somewhere, right? When she entered the building, an uneasy feeling washed over her. The hallway was long and dimly lit, the air thick and heavy with silence. There were no other actors waiting for their turn, no casting agents or assistants milling about, just an eerie, empty corridor leading to a single door at the end. Her instincts screamed at her to turn back, but ambition kept her moving forward. She knocked on the door, and when it opened, the room she stepped into was nothing like any audition space she had seen before. The room was small and cold, with bare walls and a single chair placed in the center. Surrounding the chair were 4 figures, 2 men and 2 women, each wearing plain white masks that covered their faces entirely. There was something unsettling about the way they stood, their posture too still, too deliberate. Before she could say a word, one of the women stepped forward, grabbed her arm, and pushed her into the chair. My grandmother's heart pounded in her chest as fear began to take hold. She tried to ask what was going on, but one of the men stepped closer, leaning down until his masked face was inches from hers. "You're going to do something for us," he whispered. His voice was low, calm, but filled with a quiet menace that sent shivers down her spine. They handed her a piece of paper with an address written on it. The instructions were simple: go to the apartment, retrieve a small package, and bring it back. There was no explanation, no discussion, just an order. One of the men stepped back into the shadows, his eyes never leaving her. As my grandmother left the building, she felt their gaze following her, even after she was out of sight. The streets were unusually quiet as she made her way to the apartment, her mind racing with thoughts of what might be happening. Could she go to the police? Could she warn someone inside the apartment? When she arrived, the building was as silent as the one she had just left. The apartment was on the 3rd floor, and with each step she took, her anxiety grew. She didn't know what to expect, but something inside her told her that this was no ordinary task. As she approached the apartment door, she hesitated. Should she knock? Should she just turn around and leave? But before she could make a decision, she felt a presence behind her. One of the masked figures had followed her. He stood at the far end of the hallway, watching her, his silent gaze a reminder that she had no choice. She opened the door slowly, stepping inside the dark, cold apartment. The air was thick with tension, and as she made her way toward the corner where the safe was hidden, she felt the masked figure's presence looming behind her. Time was running out. The safe was just as they had described, and with shaking hands she began to open it. But as she did, her mind raced with plans of escape. Could she grab something and defend herself? Could she make it out before the masked figure closed in? Just as she was about to reach into the safe, her eyes landed on a heavy glass vase sitting on the nearby table. Without thinking, she grabbed it and swung it at the masked figure, the sound of shattering glass echoing through the apartment. He crumpled to the floor, and my grandmother didn't wait to see if he was unconscious. She bolted for the door, her heart pounding as she fled down the stairs, out into the night. She didn't stop running until she was far from the building, disappearing into the city streets. The masked figures were never found, and my grandmother never learned who they were or what their purpose had been. But the memory of that night stayed with her, haunting her in ways she never expected. What would you have done in her situation? Would you have followed through with their demands or tried to escape? Let us know in the comments below, and if this story has you hooked, don't forget to like the video. Though she escaped that night, the nightmare didn't end there. For weeks, she lived in fear, constantly looking over her shoulder, wondering if the masked figures would return. The sense of being watched never left her, even as time passed. Every knock on the door, every unfamiliar face in a crowd, sent chills down her spine. It wasn't just paranoia. Something was out there. For months after the incident, strange letters began arriving at her apartment. The messages were cryptic, short, and unsettling. "We are watching," one of them said. Another simply read, "You are not done." There was no signature, no indication of who had sent them, but the implication was clear. The masked figures hadn't forgotten about her. The letters eventually stopped, but the fear never truly went away. She distanced herself from Hollywood, stepping back from the industry and avoiding any mention of her past ambitions. While my grandfather continued his career in film, my grandmother became more and more reclusive, haunted by the memory of that night and the shadows that had followed her ever since. Even decades later, the experience still haunted her. Every so often, during family gatherings, she would fall silent, her eyes distant, as if she were reliving the terror all over again. We never pressed her for details, but we knew that something had changed in her after that night. The dream of Hollywood had turned into a nightmare she couldn't escape. As I listened to her recount the story, I realized that the glitz and glamour of Hollywood were just an illusion. Beneath the surface, there were secrets, darkness, and fear. Things that most people never saw, but that lingered in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. If this story gave you chills, make sure to subscribe to Nightmare Narratives and hit the notification bell so you never miss another terrifying tale like this one.